Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Kickoff, the project launch for the City of Boston State of Broadband Equity in the city. This is a study, a little bit of a long time in coming, but for some that many parties are very keen on having, and we're proud to launch it today. What we hope to do through this digital equity study and municipal broadband study, it's actually more than one, we hope to evaluate Boston's current and potential future broadband environment, including levels of service. We are going to look to conduct a municipal broadband evaluation and study, and we're going to assess our digital equity inclusion programs and efforts and make best recommendations going forward. With that, I'd like to ask Mela to forward to the next slide. Now start with our introductions. Joining us today is Joanne Hovis, President and founder of CTC Technology and Energy. Joanne is an attorney with tons of experience in public sector communications network planning, who frequently provides guidance and advice to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors, an organization she was once president of, as well as being a recognized authority on the broadband market and provisioning of communication services to the public. For more than 20 years, she has directed CTC's consultancy service related to strategic planning, market analysis, business modeling, grant funding, and financial analysis for localities, states, and tribal governments across the country. Joanne leads the CTC teams that advise the states of Alabama, Connecticut, Georgia, and New Mexico, and also in the cities of Atlanta, Baltimore, New York, San Francisco, and Seattle. CTC's programs are also visible in statewide broadband networks of Colorado, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. Joanne leads CTC's advisory work regarding federal broadband funding programs, which we're seeing a lot of this year, thankfully. She is also a co-founder and CEO of the Coalition for Local Internet Choice, CLIC, and a member of the boards of the Benton Foundation, Consumer Reports, and the Fiber Broadband Association. Also joining us today is Karen White, Vice President for Client Solutions at CTC. Karen is an electrical engineer with extensive project management and analysis experience for government wireless and wireline broadband network projects at the local, state, and agency levels. Karen has worked extensively and closely on a number of Boston projects, including the long-term Crown Castle fiber lease, the IRU, the Vitro mapping project, and the upcoming DWDM, we love to say that, Dense Wave Division Multiplexing Network Core Replacement Project. Thanks for joining us, Karen. And also joining us is David Talbot, Director of Research Services at CTC. And David comes to this project with a lot of local background. David was a Knight Science Journalism Fellow at MIT, while also the Senior Editor for the MIT Technology Review. He was a fellow at Professor Susan Crawford's team, that is at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, and an investigative reporter at the Boston Herald, but we won't hold that against him, mind you. David was also a longtime commissioner and former chair and vice chair of Massachusetts' second largest public power utility, the Municipal Light Plant of Reading, Massachusetts. For those of you who aren't aware, an MLP is a requirement for any Massachusetts municipal broadband project. And also joining us and new to this team, we welcome her, is Mela Goodrich. She's spinning our slides today, and she is a civic technology analyst for CTC. Mela is a new and welcome addition to the team, working on grant strategy, grant application, and digital equity engagements such as ours. Before joining CTC, Mela served as a business development associate for Broadband Breakfast, a news organization covering technology policy and digital equity. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to Boston, albeit virtually. One thing I should mention that I did not yet was that both Joanne Hovis and David Talbot have extensive experience advising Massachusetts communities in local municipal light plants on the development of municipal broadband projects. Joanne was consultant to the state's Mass Broadband Initiative, as well as specific communities' last mile projects in Western Massachusetts. David, meanwhile, worked closely with Professor Susan Crawford's Berkman Center group as they advised MLPs in Massachusetts of the opportunities for municipal broadband projects. I think this experience is going to come very much in our favor during the course of this broadband equity study in Boston. Going ahead, if you have questions for today, please drop them in the chat, or we can discuss them at the close. This is going to go very quickly. We're going to slide through these slides as fast as we can. Next slide, please. In the earlier invite, I think we told you that CTC Technology and Energy will help us answer questions and help us better understand the internet, looking at things like accessibility, quality, affordability, opportunities, and workforce. The slide before you right now is, I think, a great illustration. Dan Noyes from Tech Goes Home often uses the 3 bullets on the right to talk about the 3-legged stool of digital equity and access. That is connectivity, the tools to get connected, and the skills to use them. In the city and in other cities and towns and counties, we also add choice and competition. This was the path that was set for us in the 1996 Telecom Act. We bring in competition, we have better choice for our residents, better choice for consumers, better service for consumers, and better pricing. Did it happen? 25 years later, the jury is still out. Much has happened, much has been successful. Pricing, improved customer service, we don't know. That's one of the things we're going to be studying here today. With that, next slide, please. I'd like to just briefly leave these here as a placeholder. You can review them later. These are 2 definitions we borrow from the National Digital Inclusion Association. One is for digital equity. The other is for digital inclusion, which actually holds more points than we usually see in definitions for digital inclusion. They're great, and I'm offering them to you here today from NDIA because this is National Digital Inclusion Week in America. With that, I'd like to move into the bulk of our presentation, and Mela will move us to the next slide. I just wanted to touch base briefly here and remind folks that we have, during COVID, had a couple of studies and evaluations of needs in Boston. One was done by Commissioner Emily Shea's Age Strong group. The results of that are on the slide. I won't dive too much into it, but you can see that Age Strong actually had a very clever way of doing this. They used their community partners, 88 organizations, to survey and evaluate the needs of seniors in Boston. Someone is asking a question if the slides will be shared. Yes, they will be shared after the presentation. Thank you. And the next slide, please. And this is just touching very briefly. I think Mark is on the call, as well as Andy Horgan, 2 of the people we work very closely with over at the Boston schools. I think everyone is aware of all the work that was done through the schools to connect families. I think at a high point, we may have connected about 6,000 or 7,000 school-age families with hotspots and other forms of connection to the internet. And I think currently the schools are very busy provisioning about 2,000 units of internet essentials to whichever families they can sign up through Comcast. Next slide, please. Thanks. And I know that the Boston Housing Authority is on the call. Hi, Lydia. Hi, Joel. BHA has been very active on the digital equity inclusion front. They've flyered their residents. They've worked with their community partners. They surveyed folks, and they found kind of alarming issues here. They see that 1 in 3 seniors lack broadband at home, as well as 1 in 3 residents whose first language is Spanish. They also so this is a problem that they are quickly facing. I know that BHA has a couple of projects in the work. One is with Starry, another one is through, I believe, an ARPA grant. We wish them the best of luck, and we hope to hear more about that soon. And here I just want to touch base on some of the other partners that we've worked with over the last 1.5 to 2 years during COVID. I guess it's been 1.5 years, and have been invaluable help in terms of connecting us with Citizens Indeed and giving us guidance and direction. That is Yusuf, Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement. Natasha White has been incredibly helpful at the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet. The Office of Workforce Development just had a public hearing at the beginning of September on how to spend the ARPA money. And together, I think we've been working on some great initiatives. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just wanted to touch base on another partner that we've had during this time, and that has been the Boston City Council. I can't tell you how keen the city councilors are on digital equity and inclusion solutions. And they are huge fans of Tech Goes Home, BNN, and municipal broadband. Part of the reason we have today's study is that the city council stood up and said, we want to look very closely at municipal broadband in Boston. And that's what we're doing through this study. Next slide, please. Okay, at this point, I'd like to hand this off to Joanne Hovis. Again, any questions, toss them in the chat, and hopefully we'll have time for discussion at the end. Joanne?
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it is always a pleasure to work with the City of Boston. Congratulations to all of you from several states away on last night's win. Mela, can I have the next slide, please? What I'm going to share with you now is just a brief summary of what we will be doing in the analysis that is going to take place in the next few months. What we'll be doing, how it is framed, the kinds of questions we'll be asking, the kinds of data we will be collecting, and the types of recommendations we'll be making. But generally, to summarize what we'll be doing is that we'll be trying to understand the existing internet infrastructure and service environment, including pricing, and we'll use a range of different data collection mechanisms to do that. We're going to try to understand and summarize the existing environment with regard to digital equity and inclusion programs. So what does the city already have going on, and what kinds of partnerships does it have in place with the nonprofit community and so on? Might just summarize some of that. And we'll be then making recommendations based on all of the data and analysis collected for the creation of new programs or additional resources necessary and scaling up of existing programs. We'll also do this in light of, excuse me, best practices and experience from around the country in some of your peer cities that are also working in areas. Although I will point out as an aside, excuse me, I'll point out as an aside that Boston has very much been a pioneer and an innovator in this space, and very few cities, I think, are quite as far along in developing programs as well as data as you are. So the big picture here is understanding the current environment and then understanding what it will take from a resource and effort standpoint to change that environment and impact it for the best. Mela, can I have the next slide, please? We're looking across the full range of concerns that arise with regard to broadband internet. There's the first issue is accessibility. Where is broadband actually available and where is it not? Are there places where there is no service available at all? And what might be the reasons for that? How are investment patterns on the private sector side changing and shaping what is happening in your various neighborhoods? Where is competition emerging and where is it not? And most importantly, how do we understand and quantify the gaps to the greatest degree possible so that you understand what it'll take to fill those gaps? Putting aside the actual availability and the infrastructure, then looking at what the services are. What is actually available to consumers and how does that vary across the city? What's the pricing and what kinds of options are available and how does that vary? And if it varies, as with quality across the city. And then what kinds of options and strategies do we think are out there, both for the city to undertake and for the city to do in partnership with the ISP community? Can I have the next slide? So we'll look across the full range of existing inclusion and equity programs. We'll analyze them in light of best practices with regard to your peer communities and then benchmark them and make some recommendations around that, including what the cost of new and expanded programs might be, so that you have some tangible, concrete, and actionable recommendations. Can I have the next slide? We're also looking with some detail at the current internet environment through a range of different data collection mechanisms, both qualitative and quantitative. We will be working through interviews with the providers, data that we collect independently through a variety of different test mechanisms in the home and online, as well as publicly available government data at the federal level in particular, and whatever the state may have, to analyze where there is infrastructure and where there are services. I think I just saw a question come through the chat asking about whether there would be an analysis of these kinds of considerations in light of demographics as well. And what we plan to do with regard to demographics is overlay the data we find about existing infrastructure services and pricing with census data, so that we are understanding if and where there are there is alignment or not. Are there patterns that align with demographics? I will speak also, I think, the questions regarding ensuring representativeness across the city and how we're analyzing ISP claims about speeds. This is very much why we want to collect primary data rather than using only existing data sets. The in-home speed test strategy is designed to allow for collection of data at least 24 locations to be selected in partnership with the city, where we will place equipment with the willing participation of the homeowner or resident, of equipment that is placed to test the speed coming into and departing the home, both upload and download speeds. Where the equipment is placed is at the router rather than at the laptop. And the significance of this is that if the equipment is placed at the router, we are measuring the speeds as they enter the home and depart the home to go up to the network, rather than measuring the speed of the Wi-Fi connection within the home, or whatever the in-home connection is, or the speed of the laptop or device that is being used. Online speed tests are a very useful tool in very large numbers because they can show us patterns, and they show some aggregated patterns, but because they are measuring speeds from a particular device, they're not necessarily showing us exactly what is being delivered to the home. So we are in the process of doing a testing of the online speeds effectively by doing in-home speed tests. Can I have the next slide? I want to be sure we are answering all the questions, but I think I'll come back to them after I finish the presentation, so that I'm not doing it ad hoc, but I can do it more comprehensively and make sure that we are addressing your questions. At the same time, we are also going to develop a system level cost estimate for what a comprehensive city-owned fiber to the premises network would cost to build. And the criticality of this is understanding the level of investment that would be necessary to undertake a fiber to the home effort. I can say more on that topic, but effectively it's an engineering analysis of existing conditions, cost to build, timeline to build, and so on, that's very much customized based on the construction environment throughout Boston to get to a planning level, system level cost estimate for capital costs on a network of this sort. Can I have the next slide? I can turn it back to Mike here. Mike, if you'd like to facilitate the question answering, or if you prefer that I just go through the questions.
I can facilitate, that's fine. I'm looking at the same chat as you. Reyes asked a question about the promises made by ISPs regarding speeds. That's an interesting question. I don't know which set of promises you're discussing. There were two sets of promises. During COVID, the FCC essentially forced all providers to make a commitment that they would deliver service. They would deliver a minimum speed. They would not shut people off for past due accounts. What else was in the, Joanne, do you remember what else was in the corporate commitment that was made and accepted by pretty much all of the providers across the country? It was not perfect, but it was just a minimum speed. Reyes, I think one of the things you're asking about is the 25.3. 25.3 is unfortunately still a standard. Nobody is crazy about it, but that's what the world is, and that's what the most recent legislation out of Congress sort of dictated and defined. Everyone would like to go to a higher level. We're not there yet. And one of the things that hurts a city like Boston that has been successful in making sure that broadband is available citywide, what's hurt us is that we are not eligible for any capital funding under the federal dollars that are available in the ARPA because we've already met their minimum thresholds. I don't know why we get punished for having done well for the last few years, but there you have it. Lydia asked a question from the BHA. A deeper dive on barriers for some of the low-cost options might be useful as well. Thanks, Lydia. Good question. Lydia, I know, as well as Emily, have worked very well on the emergency broadband benefit, which we see on this slide. I think there's an earlier slide as well that kind of breaks down who is eligible and how. This is an extraordinarily challenging application process set up by the FCC. It looks a lot like the old Lifeline telephone service application because they had that in-house and it was an easy adaptation to broadband. But the problem with it is if you print it out, it's about 10 pages. It asks a little bit of financial data, and you have to bounce between the FCC and the application process and the provider who is going to give you either in-home cable modem service or a wireless hotspot or phone or something along those lines. The reason that we're pushing this very hard is that if we can get people who are connected with those in need to help them walk through this process. Right now, it's a 1-year free service, $600 value, say $50 per month, plus the cost of the device, which is another $200. If we can get them through the initial phase, we're almost 100% sure that the next federal funding will fund this for 3 to 4 more years. So this could be a very extensive contribution. Hopefully more will come later. We're trying to think of ways to literally help people walk through this process. It is confusing. My head starts to spin when I look at the application. I thought I saw a question from Emily here too. Emily asked the question, one of the challenges we've heard for older adults is understanding okay, so it's the same question a bit, and how to access them. Elderly citizens, senior citizens have a couple of different options. RCN and Comcast, for instance, have a senior option available. It is not particularly attractive. People look at it and say, for $2, I'll take a pass, thanks. It doesn't quite work for them. However, EBB is an enormously advantageous program for seniors. So you can use this for a hotspot, you can use this for a phone, you can use this for in-home access. Lastly, the Internet Essentials program of Comcast is a roughly $10 a month program that is available throughout the city. It is needs-based. Its application process is messy. It's complicated, but it's not as bad as the emergency broadband benefits. So I don't know, when you're comparing them to the federal government, I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's what we have. Again, I think we're going to be working well. The city right now has purchased approximately 3,500 Internet Essential packages to give to Boston families in need. And we're splitting those between the Boston Public Schools and Tech Goes Home. Tech Goes Home is, again, working with their community partners to deliver them wherever they can to people who graduate through their training program. One thing I'd like to mention at this point, and it may have been The emergency broadband benefit was kind of off to a slow start this summer, but I think they published something this week that said we have 6 million people subscribed nationwide to the emergency broadband benefit. And drawing that mailer, was able to take a quick peek yesterday. Boston's subscriber base has grown over the last month. It was at about 6,000 at Labor Day, but it's at about 8,500 right now. So that something is happening out there. To get 2,500 new subscriptions in the month of September alone is good news. That means that either the word is getting out or people have figured out how to navigate the system. We're hoping that continues. One of the earlier questions may have touched base briefly on the home speed test. This is one of the things, the reason I have that on that slide is we may reach out to folks who are on this call and others who are close to us. The home speed test, we're going to be doing a sampling across all of Boston's neighborhoods. The way broadband service gets delivered, the delivery is often known down at the neighborhood level. And we want to sample as many of them as we can at the outskirts of the city, if you will, at the end points of the geographic area. That's like up against the Neponset River or on the boundaries with Brookline. We're going to reach out to those areas. So we may be sending out a quick Google form in the next week or two, asking people to volunteer for this test. I don't know, David Talbot is on the line. He may be able to give a little bit of an overview here of how the test will work. But ideally, we're looking for you folks who are in our administration who could try this test at home and give us a good, accurate read. I know that there were challenges and problems in the Cambridge application. One of the problems, and it often happens when we deal with broadband issues, is that people are challenged and it's very hard to communicate with them. You may set somebody up with a test in their home, but then follow-up communication with them, say by telephone, you miss, and a few other things. So we're hoping that if we can get some folks who are in city government to engage in this process willingly, and we can kind of proportionally distribute them geographically across the city, we're hoping that we'll have good response from them, that we can use their city email address or their home email address or text them and get some quick responses to any questions or evaluations we need. David, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and hello, everybody, and thank you for joining today. I think with respect to both the in-home testing and the web-based testing, we're going to set up a dedicated engineering startup call for that part of our study, because there are many good questions, and it's important that we get this off on the right foot, especially in soliciting sites to test and vetting those sites to make sure that, to Mike's point, they are occurring, sort of sprinkled throughout the city and in the edge neighborhoods and in the representative areas of all neighborhoods. So I think we need to devote a separate call just to starting up that whole process. If that's the high level start for today. I'm looking at the chat and there's a lot of things we could discuss, and I leave it to Mike to how much more you want to go into on this call. I did work on the Cambridge study, so I'm very, very well aware of what we did there, but we can talk about that now or at another time at Mike's discretion.
And Virginia and DC, hello, Virginia. Virginia asked a question when the study will be complete. I think we may, Joanne, I'll defer to you on this, but I think we're envisioning kind of a rolling report on this, because this is actually a multifaceted study. So there's no need to hold up the information upon discovery and report to wait for some later information. Joanne, do you have a sense of how we might roll this out?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Mike. We are likely to, within a couple of months, start presenting preliminary findings in terms of infrastructure services and pricing based on the data collection that we do, as well as shortly after that, some of the findings on the engineering side about the cost of the fiber to the home network. The recommendations will then follow after that. But generally on a project of this scale, particularly given the data collection needs, we're looking at a minimum of 4 to 6 months. And some of that's going to just depend on how things play out in terms of collecting some of this primary data with the in-home testing. But you know, it's going to fully bake. We're looking at months rather than weeks.
Thanks. Lydia asked a question about testing for speeds. I don't know, maybe David could answer that question. I think we're testing for a floor, a minimum delivery, but I could be mistaken. And Thalia asked a question about accessibility, whether there are barriers to getting service, contact with the providers, and any obstacles such as payment methods, documentation. Thalia, I think you may be speaking about the Internet Essentials program and or the emergency broadband program. Both of them do have some barriers to them. That's why I think it's sort of incumbent on us as the city and with our community partners to help people get through these. It's the nature of what the FCC set up. We can't really control it. And the same is true from Comcast. They set up the parameters. We can push through it, particularly if it's flawed or erroneous, but it literally becomes a one-to-one exercise with every applicant. I don't know if that answers your question or if anyone else would like to contribute.
I would just add, Mike, that when these testing, when the in-home testing starts, there's going to be an information request given to that resident because we want to understand certainly what they're subscribing to. If it happens to be Internet Essentials, we want to know that. Which speed tier are they subscribing to? We want to know what type of router they have because it does affect what even though we're plugging into the router, it does affect the results. It can. We want to know their level of use in the house and other things. So we're going to want to know all those things so we can understand what it is we're looking at. But again, we need to have a separate startup call to get all those questions aired and started off on the right foot.
Yeah, I think the speed test is going to be an interesting exercise, and that'll actually be, I think, one of the longer projects, right, David? You need a baseline that goes over a period of time.
Yeah. So, and again, deferring the full answer to that to a later date. The web-based speed tests should be up for I think we said a year, and the in-home we could do it that long, or we could discuss whether it needs to be as long as a year because it is asking a lot of people, and there could be some drop off of willingness to participate or other issues. So we can resolve all that, but yes, it's going to be over a long period of time. So the long period of time on the web-based enables you to get more data points from more people who might just do one test, but at least you have a data point from somewhere. And the in-home, it's at the same site, and it's doing a test hourly all the time. So you have data across the day, across the night, weekends, holidays, and you can see how it might differ. And just so everybody knows, I mean, the service you get, if you look at it, it's up to 50 megabits or up to 100 megabits. And there's not a service level agreement at the consumer level. And we all experience when it's Saturday night and it's putting into Netflix, suddenly it's pixelating or dropping out. It is the nature of the consumer broadband marketplace that it's bursty and it varies by demand. There's a certain amount of bandwidth per circuit, and depending on demand of the individual homes, it varies per home, everywhere. So.
Very good. As David was talking, just one thing, I think everybody on this call knows that, but if not, the city's role around broadband and cable is this. Around cable, we can license the cable provider, and we have some federal rules that allow us to look at things like how they build out, how they do customer service, what they report to us as a city on behalf of residents who have their service. On broadband, none of that exists. The 96 Act defined all of this, but in the year 2002, and Joanne, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking it was Michael Powell was chairman of the FCC, and there was something called the cable modem ruling. And what that said was that broadband by a cable service, a cable modem, is not subject to any FCC regulations. They can pretty much do whatever they want. that ruined us. It ruined us 20 years ago, and we're still suffering from the effects of that today. It doesn't stop us from sort of trying to exercise our cable authority over the providers, but they can always push back and say, hey, that's broadband. You can't be in our space on broadband. I don't think that rule is ever going to get changed. I think it's been around too long for now, but I'd be willing to spend some money to get it changed. Joanne, you have anything to add to that? You know, this is one I always hop on.
Yeah, well, you're 100% right, Mike. I think that was the moment at which cities lost the ability to directly shape the broadband data market to the benefit of the public. And what that means is that the regulatory tools that we customarily think of as being useful in this context are simply not available for purposes of the broadband internet. And so that is why many of our recommendations are going to be around programs that the city can design itself, ways that the city can interact with consumers to support them and educate them and help them, as well as shaping the market through incentives and contract rather than through regulatory mechanisms. And that is the set of tools that is available to cities.
Mike, it's Jerry. Could I just
Harry, I thought I was going to get through this call without you contributing, but I guess not. Welcome.
Well, I hope when I'm done, you continue to characterize it as contributing. I think that I just, for everybody here, wanted to make sure that folks understand that Boston is aggressively pushing in DC, both in the Congress, before Treasury, and at the FCC on a number of these issues. And while I think that you are right to take the most conservative point of view, I think it would be a disservice to your and the mayor and the council's advocacy that it's been going on a number of the issues. For instance, the city of Boston has asked Treasury to clarify that the 25-3 limitation of the ARPA money with respect to construction only applies under D, that is the residual investment in broadband that's available under ARPA, but that ARPA investments in broadband for purposes of addressing COVID challenges or discrepancies or deviations or difficulties for different communities should not be impacted by the 25-3, and Boston filed those comments, and a number of folks around the country followed. We've never gotten a final answer, but the Treasury's rules are still interim final rules. That means that they're effective immediately, but it doesn't mean that they can't change. And we hope that folks are aware of Boston's advocacy on that area, and you can find our filing on the Treasury's webpage. And we were very happy that the National League of Cities took it and then shared it with others and encouraged others to support us. I think the other point is that we're kind of spoiled in Boston that our two senators are really the head of the spear, or the tip of the spear, with respect to the net neutrality issue. That is the issue that you talked about before. The classic definitional clarify the definition of what an internet or an ISP service is, and that it's an interstate information service. And if you parse those two words, interstate means state and local governments need not apply. This is the exclusive domain of the federal government. And then information service, meaning that it's neither Title II common carrier, Title III a wireless or broadcast service, or Title VI that is a cable service. And you know, Senators Markey and Warren have long been leading the challenge to redefine that service. And we think that at some point, if there is a fully populated FCC, that'll be one of the lead issues, and it'll give us an opportunity. The last thing is that I wanted to make clear is whether it's an interstate information service or it's magic, it's still a service or a good that's being sold in the city of Boston. And therefore, we do have authority, both we and the Commonwealth have the authority under private attorney general and trust and fraud statutes to say that if people are promising and contracting out to provide a certain speed, which is greater than 25.3, and they're not delivering on that, then there are opportunities to enforce those types of standards on traditional contract law or fraud law or representation law. And Boston has not surrendered any of those opportunities. So again, I think what Mike was saying is what we have to do from a conservative standpoint, but please don't believe that the city of Boston has surrendered on any of these issues. We're actively pursuing them everywhere we possibly can. And with that, I'll be quiet and get out of the road.
No, thank you, Jerry. I appreciate you doing that. By the way, I did not introduce Jerry. I apologize for that. Jerry Litter is a partner in Best and Krieger, and he is our outside counsel in DC for regulatory work with Congress, with the FCC, as well as discussions that might be happening on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jerry. And Jerry right now is working on an issue that's important to Boston's competitive landscape, but people seldom understand, and that is what's called the MTE access docket. This is a filing that Boston will do, probably Portland, Montgomery County, San Francisco, maybe a few other cities, I think New York City. The FCC is never clear about what we call inside wiring. There's a lot of confusion about competition inside a building. And they've reopened something that we already filed in 4 years ago. And Jerry, maybe you want to briefly touch on this, because I think that this is a timely discussion in a city like Boston, where more than half of our housing is MDUs.
Right. So to start with, MDU, it's a multi-dwelling unit, or an MTE, a multi-tenant environment.
Sorry, I was sounding like a bureaucrat here. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, you're playing Washington alphabet soup. I'm proud of you, Mike. And so the question is, what rights or what limitations can the FCC and or state and local government apply when there are contractual relationships between a provider and the building owner? And by the building owner, that could be the homeowners association, that could be a co-op entity, whatever the case may be. But the question is, are there practices that are taking place today that limit competitive choice? And so you should know, or you probably have heard, that in the early 2000s, in the aughts, the FCC issued a number of orders that barred exclusive access agreements by cable operators and then by telephone providers. And the FCC made it clear that they would enforce these limitations against the provider, not the landlord, because the landlord was not subject to the jurisdiction of the FCC. But the people holding licenses from the FCC could be enforced against them. And the way the marketplace works, there are extraordinarily smart people that work for these providers, and they looked at the law and they sought to parse it. So an exclusive access agreement means that I can't say, or I can't enforce, I'm going to come in and I'm going to wire the building, and you can't let anyone else come to the building. That's one of my conditions, right? So they went from that condition to then entering into two different types of agreements. One was an exclusive marketing agreement. So you go into one of the new apartment buildings, on Boylston Street, and you go to see the property manager, and they give you your keys and they give you a package of information about the services and the amenities of the building. And one of those amenities happens to be a single cable operator. That's the only one that's presented to you. And that's the one that's advanced. And typically that one's plug and play, and it's the easiest way to go forward. And they don't tell you about the other opportunities. And that's what's called an exclusive marketing agreement. And typically the property owner is compensated in one of two ways. They either get paid or they're compensated in terms of reduced prices or better services. But there is an exchange there, right? They get the exclusive marketing in exchange for some sort of remuneration. The second type of exclusive agreement that was created was an exclusive wiring agreement. And what it said is basically, we understand that we cannot bar a second provider from coming into the building, right? You, the property owner, can do that, but we can't enforce that against you. We can't do that. But what we would like is we would like you to agree that no one else will ever touch our wires. And I know that, you know, the folks at the Boston Housing Authority are dealing with issues not dissimilar to this right now as they look to introduce competition. And so the FCC has teed up a new item. This issue was raised a couple of years ago when the city of San Francisco created an ordinance that said, hey, you can't enforce exclusive wiring agreements in the city. You have to open them up. And so it's now back, and the commission is asking a couple of things. You know, are exclusive marketing agreements bad for the residents, or are there benefits that they need to so on balance, are they okay, or should they be banned? And the second is exclusive wiring agreements. Are they good, or should they be barred as well? The cable industry has already been in to see the FCC, and they have said exclusive marketing agreements do have benefits for tenants, and they ought to be left alone. Exclusive wiring agreements are needed both under the law and under engineering. And this is where Joanne and David can tell us whether they're fibbing, but their point is that two different ISPs cannot occupy the same wiring at the same time. I don't know the answer to that. That's the assertion that's being made by the cable industry. And then the third thing that they say, and again, this is a common refrain, is that is anything that you apply to us, the cable operator, or anything that you apply to the common carrier needs to be applied to all providers of services, so all ISPs. So if you're, you know, name your ISP of the day, and I don't want to highlight anybody, but if they're not the franchise cable operator, or they're not a common carrier, and they're wiring your building, whether they're starting on the roof or they're starting in the basement, you know, should their relationships, should their contracts be modified or reviewed and subject to the same types of terms and limitations? And the cable industry says, yes, they should, that, you know, we should apply these things across the board. And so the city of Boston will continue to be active in this type of docket to encourage the commission to write the rules in such a way that that tenants have the greatest access, and that barriers to entry, whether it be at the national level, the local level, or at the building level, be eliminated to the greatest extent that they possibly can. Is that okay, Mike? Is that getting it done?
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's very helpful. Appreciate it. And I think we are coming up to 10 minutes of the hour. We're going to give everybody 10 minutes out of their hour back. So they think we were very gracious hosts and let them out a little bit early. I want to thank Joanne, Karen, David, and Mela for today's presentation. We're going to be in touch with all of you very soon, and hopefully some regular communication, so you know how the progress of these, I really think of it as 3 studies is proceeding. Please stay engaged, and we will reach out to you on the home speed test sampling, because we're going to need your help. Lastly, just in closing, let's celebrate National Digital Inclusion Week by pushing emergency broadband benefit for those in needs. If we're at 8,500 now, there's no reason why that number can't get doubled in the city over the next month or two. Thank you very much, everyone. Most appreciated.